everybody. I'm Mike Bizarre. Today, we're talking about who moved my AI cheese, followed by the need for maybe a little more AI strategic planning. And then finally, we're going to take a look at this new large language model from Meta. You're watching Techstrong, gang. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, and we're back, and let's talk and get to our guest today. We have John Willis joining us, who has been, I don't know, John, you're probably the most involved person in AI that I personally know anyway, but John, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Yeah, great to be here.
All right, and then we have Amanda Rosani, who's the editor of Techstrong AI and Digital CXO, which is just brimming with AI copy every week. Amanda, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
And finally, Bonnie Schneider joins me today in the studio and our resident expert on all things climate. And, I got to say, you're coming up to speed on this AI stuff pretty quickly, too. So
thanks, Mike. I'm enjoying it.
This is becoming quite the quorum. All right. Let's jump in here, folks. There's a couple of reports out, and I think there's 3 different surveys, and I'm not going to get into a lot of details on each one. But the thing about them all is, it kind of says that we don't really know how our IT jobs are going to evolve. One suggests that software engineers have embraced these tools immensely, but they're using them with mixed success, we shall say. And a lot of folks are trying to figure out, is this better for senior DevOps engineers, or does it eliminate the need for junior DevOps engineers? Another one, though, says there's these folks called system administrators who aren't really programmers per se. They tend to use more graphical tools, and they seem to be struggling with understanding how to use Gen AI. But there's an argument that says that they might ultimately benefit more because, the Gen AI can create snippets of code for them, and they might not need as many software engineers. John, I know you've been kind of following this whole space, but let's jump in here. Where do you think all this is going to land, and how will an IT team of the future maybe be structured?
Yeah, I think we've got a huge learning curve, particularly sort of enterprises that haven't grown up really with these new models. One of the interesting fears I keep hearing from people, and it scares me a little bit too, is first you hear commonly people say, Gen AI or these LLMs are my apprentice or my assistant, right? And so there's this one thought group that says that the people that really know what they're doing are going to have their jobs for a long time. AI is not going to replace them. But more and more, maybe they're going to need less junior people because, let's face it. I did something the other day that I did a year ago on GPT 3.5, and I ran it last week on GPT 4.0, and I wrote a little sort of LinkedIn thing, and the difference was it was uncomparable, the difference of what the answer was, including code. And so the ability for these things to produce quality output, is, sort of easily equivalent to an apprentice or a junior admin or a junior developer. So here's the scary part is if we don't watch what we're doing in these industries, we may dry up our supply chain of people. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that's a legitimate fear that's happening, that if we keep thinking we don't need to hire as many interns, we don't need to hire as many sort of junior programmers, junior sysadmins, or junior DevOps, if you will, because we don't need as many anymore because these tools can replace them. Well, as these older sort of gurus roll off, what happens? So I think the answer is leadership needs to sort of understand this and pay a tax for apprenticeship, for learning, for those things. So that's one other thing. And then the other thing I wanted to sort of end off with was I liked the survey data because it's creating a consistent narrative, if you will, in that the surveys that you talked about, somewhere around 70% of people that are getting surveyed are saying, yes, damn the torpedoes, I'm using Gen AI. And it was about a month or two ago, Microsoft and LinkedIn had done a really extensive, 4,000 respondees, because LinkedIn, you have those people available, right? And it was very consistent. I think theirs was 70 75% are using Gen AI at work, 4,000 people surveyed. And then 78% of those are saying that they're doing this, what they call BYO AI, bring your own AI, which is the shadow AI thing that I also am pretty worried about. So I like the data of these surveys because it's sort of telling the same story over and over and over.
Do you think we might also look at it another way, and there's going to be a generational shift, and the newbies may be learning how to use these AI tools in college, and they'll come out as quote unquote senior engineers, and maybe the younger kids will take to it better than the senior folks.
If I had the crystal ball already, I'd be out on some Grady White. I'd be hanging out with Alan with a boat right next to him. But But I think the real fear is it's the knowledge, the contextual knowledge of a business that gets lost in this possible funnel that we might be creating. So I think you're right. I think the kids. I mean, the domain of how to go too far, but I'm really exploring this with DevOps. I think DevOps in the next 5 years is just going to be, or software engineering in general, but certainly what we do in DevOps, DevSecOps S3, you will just have natural language conversations with generative AIs to do everything you do. I'm convinced that, that for everything that you're sort of dealing, it will know your network. It will know your sort of Terraform and topologies. You won't be sort of copying and pasting a Terraform. You will literally, this is this agentic processing they're talking about, where we go not from just, hey, ChatGPT or Copilot, write me some code or write me a Terraform. You're going to just say, go and fix this issue, or go ahead and build this feature. And there are a bunch of OpenDevin, Copilot Workspace from Microsoft. These tools are already showing promise here. So I think that's going to change. But again, back to your original question, my fear is the Obi-Wan Kenobis of the large banks and the sort of the retail who understand the technology and what they call the social technical, but the business side. I think there's a fear that we could starve that out, where the young kids come in and we don't, again, the technology is getting solved. It's the expertise at a large company like Target to make a great business decision, or a business decision turns into a technology delivery where the Obi-Wan Kenobis of the company can say, hey, LLM, go ahead and give me a prototype for this solution, as opposed to, hey, junior programmer, you've been on a job, let me give you a really hard, I mean, I know how I started. I started at Exxon in the senior, and I was like, give me work. And they gave me the most complicated problems that, and I learned really fast because they were just booming and they couldn't do all the work they had to do. And they gave me, like write an accounting system for a Cray. So I think that would be my sort of response to your question.
I kind of want to expand on your question, Mike. I think if you look far enough down to our younger generation and our kids, they're growing up more and more in this digital online world with no fear of using all these different technologies and tools. And I think AI is going to be really prevalent in their world, and they're going to take it for granted. They just use AI all the time. And they're going to have these AI skills just inherently because they're online so much more and with no fear of trying out these tools.
But again, I just, right. And I totally agree with that. But the big question is, will they get hired? Because do we really need them to solve the business problems? The Exxon or the B of A, or because the people who, at the top of the pyramid are basically don't need them because they can use, that's the.
Or maybe those kids will do what the top of the pyramid's doing at a lower cost, and that'll be a factor in the equation as well.
Could be.
All right. John, what does the team look like in the future? Because in my mind, it's starting to emerge. You talked about agents. And I think that each DevOps person or IT person is going to have, 7 or 8 agents that are specialized for different tasks that they're trying to orchestrate. But then I am part of a larger team, and everybody on the team has their own agents. So now I got 5 people with, 100 agents that need to interact with each other. How will we kind of orchestrate all this across a group?
Yeah, for the longest time, within the last 2 years of like studying this space and playing with the space and talking with people and doing some consulting with clients, I had a strong belief that, the two pizza team model needed to include an AI expert. Because I think originally, there were a lot of companies that thought we need to hire as many AI experts as we can. But then as we started seeing it play out, it was like, no, we have really, it goes back to the sort of business people. The two pizza team, I have the network. I have the different componentry that I know how to deliver and build the right solutions. What I'm missing is this, sort of AI knowledge, a different way to think, which again, I think is the common thread between both of our topics, which, are all the sort of like, future of AI, strategy of AI is, companies are not sitting down and literally thinking about the discipline of massively training people in an organization. And one way to infuse training would be add sort of another head count to the two pizza team. And basically, it would be a pure AI expert, and you get this, and that could be a good role for a young, young person out of college, right? They've gotten their sort of MBA or, Master's of Science, on AI, and then throw them right into that. And then they get to learn, and that solves my other dilemma. But I do think the agentic thing also is another, it's one thing to say we're going to reduce coders because of Copilot and all these tools. It's another thing when you start seeing what these army of bots can do. And be honest with you, Mike, I'm a little unclear what a team looks like. If you talk to some of the people working at the big 3, big 4, whatever they call them today, and it's in their best interest is they want to come in and write like 1 million bots for a company. This is like RPA all over again, but in a whole other level. And I like, that scares the heck out of me. Like, who's going to do the technical debt, cleanup of like 100, 10,000 bots. But maybe other bots, I don't know, but agents. So I think the agent thing is really interesting because these agentic, they're the sort of the poster child term for this now is agentic dev tools or agentic DevOps or agentic. And it really is the combination of LLMs being orchestrated in such a way and personas that can say, hey, I'm a system engineer. I'm a developer. And you literally start routing work in a very function-oriented way. So I don't know. I think it's a little early in this agentic discussion to really understand what teams are going to look like. Oh, this is not great.
There's probably also some resistance because nobody wants to think that a new technology is going to replace them. I mean, they want to use it, of course, because it's going to improve productivity, but probably there's a little bit of caution in terms of how much do we implement it, how much do we rely on it, for those that work in DevOps.
Right. Well, Bobby, I just want to add, I'm sorry to do that, but this is a thread that was in those surveys as well. I thought shadow AI was going to happen because people couldn't wait and they needed it faster. But some of the surveys are pointing out that people's fear of telling leadership that they're using AI might play into the we don't need you anymore. So that's
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So to that point, John, who should be responsible for teaching these people and training them? And it's an ongoing debate, but do I, as the employee, need to really drive this on my own, or should organizations have some responsibility for training their squads? Because a lot of times I think a lot of leaders think it's on the employee to stay current.
Yeah, no, I think that's the wrong decision. I might have mentioned in one of our previous discussions, but I was at a large conference, and one of the guys who it was Cigna. They said this publicly. So they have the guy who basically pioneered their whole cloud journey, right? And sort of like talk about lessons learned, right? And one of the things they learned through that process is they didn't do a global education program on cloud, and so he was brought in to help this sort of new strategy goal for, like they had a cloud leadership team. Now they have an AI leadership team, right? So bring everybody in, bring the important players across HR, different part. And he's, his first suggestion, and they have implemented, is sort of a global do's and don'ts and what you should know as sort of the training, the big corporation training is it's the most annoying stuff you have to do. But every year you have to go through this thing, and it won't let you it won't let you cheat. Like you have to answer questions. It paces you. You can't finish it quicker. And make it one of those. So it actually is, and I'm not a permanent record. I feel like I'm not like a Tayloristic, everything has to be, but like, I think this is one of those ones where you're sort of explained what AI means to this corporation at this time, what this corporation thinks you should be doing and what you definitely should not be doing. And then literally once you go through that thing, it registers that you've taken that class. So you can't pull the do now, ask forgiveness later. So I think global training is what is a common thread of all this sort of survey data of people saying, they don't know, they're getting started early. I think it is in the best interest of an organization to put together sort of a tiger team. I would make it a permanent team, because then that becomes another sort of team of teams of teams. Mm-hmm. But I do think there is this responsibility and really for your own sort of health as an organization to sort of figure out, you don't know everything. It's emergent. It's all nascent, but like at least sort of document and make everybody in the corporate, if 78% of the people in an organization are using this technology, you got a problem. You got a real problem here. And so it really, I think state, like this is our state way we think about it right now. We don't know everything, but this is the way we're going to operate. And I want you to check box that you agree that you're going to operate this way.
All right, folks. Well, I'm going to leave it there, but do remember that these AI engines, if you want to call them that, and the LLMs, they get smarter every 3 or 4 months. So staying current on this is going to be a lifetime proposition, I think. We'll be back in a minute.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, folks, we're back. And initially, we just talked about what it means for IT folks, but the organizations as a whole seems like they are haphazardly moving down the path of AI. Nobody seems to actually have a strategic plan or how to think about this at scale because, well, there's tons of articles on Techstrong AI and elsewhere out there that are all talking about how it feels like to me, John, let's start with you, that we're kind of just stumbling down what to do with this stuff. And do we need to take a breath and kind of think about this in a longer time horizon?
I think the biggest obstacle to this technology is it is that it changes, David Edwards says this really well, that, we've been trying to put determinism, like sort of, truth and facts into this whole industry for 50 years, as long as sort of like large IT data centers and stuff work. Right. And like, it's still a very complex world. But we've sort of gotten to like we can define a supply chain and it's pretty clear and we can say what exactly happens and we have a lot of monitoring and data. So we've reined in this stuff. Now all of a sudden we have this technology that is unreinable. It is, I know that's not a word, but it's non-deterministic. And what we're failing to recognize is that this new way of doing things is probabilistic. It isn't like 1 + 1 will equal 2. In fact, early days of GPT 3.5, people would go, "Oh, you can't use that because it can't do math." It doesn't do math. It does approximation. This is approximate models. The answers are approximate. They get really good. And I think the hardest part for a corporation that's been literally thinking about solving IT problems, including software and delivery, all security, as a controlling, how much more can we control? And that is the sort of the fatal flaw. It is a fatal flaw thinking in these new generative AI models. People talk about hallucinations. Yes, hallucinations, approximate answers. based on the data. So I think there's sort of embracing and understanding that you're dealing with a different type of world. And I think that's where people come in. Like I was telling you earlier, I mean, one of the things I hear over and over is the way you solve this problem is better data classification. No, that's not an approximate. The way you solve this problem is get a better approximations of unstructured data. In fact, we've talked about this. IDC did a report last year that 90% of the data in a large organization, a commercial organization or a large organization, is unstructured. And we manage 10% of it. That's the gold. So it isn't about turning that 90% into structure, because the 90% is like spreadsheets, it's wikis, and the goal of this thing, the gold, GOLD, is that I can take that data and like turn it into knowledge in a way I could never do in the past. But if I start thinking about like, how do I, the trap of like, how do I take this is what we've been trying to do for years. How do I take all those spreadsheets and wikis and turn it into tables? And then the tables can be like, that's why we've never gotten close to what we're getting with generative AI and these common LLMs now, small. So again, I think there's not only is like training, but it's also like having where they break the bone to heal in terms of a way that we think about these problems differently than the way we've been thinking about solving these problems. And I don't know if that made sense, but
no, I'm with you. And to your point about deterministic versus approximations, I think, there are certain things that we want to have done the same way over and over again. But if I think about the way we humans make decisions, for the most part, we're using our experience to kind of make a guess ourselves, which isn't much different than what the machines are doing. And who guesses better is still up to debate in my mind, because a lot of times, to be honest, people are making quote unquote gut decisions, but was that gut decision, indigestion from what they had for breakfast, or was it really experience? It seems like the way we humans get around that is we have a bunch of us together make decisions and gut check each other. So won't the machines kind of do the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not to go too deep, but there's really three forms of inference, right? And sort of going back to Aristotle, right? To Aristotle, but like there's deductive reasoning, there's inductive reasoning, and there's abductive reasoning. And I know I'm going sort of crazy, but this is really important because the early, and now what we're seeing is at least the two of them, deductive and inductive, actually coming into play. Like deductive is more like the symbolic expert systems we've had over the years. The inductive is the sort of neural networks, what they call subsymbolic, right? And the reason why, like, I'm not just throwing out big words to make me sound impressive. The reason this is important is what we're starting to learn more and more is how does humans really, to your point, really make decisions? And it's a combination of really all three, which we really haven't explored in generative AI, which is abductive. And inductive is instinct and guesses. And so this is the beauty of marrying Gen AI with humans. So this is why the humans, probably going to be in the front, the left airline pilot seat for some time to come, because humans do abductive reasoning, and to my knowledge, no Gen AI implementation does abductive reasoning. And abductive reasoning is the sort of the instinct. Maybe I did have a great morning, and somebody when I was getting coffee was incredibly nice to me, and I'm like, my mind is really sharp today. So when I come into that meeting, I really can actually nail problems a lot quicker than I could yesterday. Like that our ability, the Columbo effect, is what's going to work with all these sort of agentic models. So I think that is sort of if we could call it the crowdsourced version of this working properly. And I think you're right. The human element will probably, and there's a lot of people believe that maybe there won't be AGI ever, or AGI within 100 years, because of the humans have this other superpower, which is our instinct, our common sense. And again, I'm not like at the Hinton or LeCun level to explain what they do, but I'm pretty certain none of their models have the sort of common sense instinct.
It also depends on how you interact with AI, and also this is a pitfall of it, is the bias in the data, the humans that are providing the data and how it's presented. And there is different biases that can come out. Like for a human, John's right. Bad experience at the coffee shop or whatever, bad day, you stub your toe, you're in a bad mood. But with AI, there can be that bias. I think that's something it was talking about crowdsourcing, but maybe having, what I find useful is to use different AI models and see, well, what does this one say? What does that one say? Because to get the consensus, and that might be something that we do going forward.
That's good. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
And I think it also comes down to, again, companies do need to understand exactly how these AI tools work and their limitations, and that they are just augmentation tools. And then they need to have a clear understanding of what problems do they have and what potential solutions could the AI tools provide, and then a clear use case and end goal moving forward, and then properly tracking it through each step to ensure that it is working as they hoped.
Bias is not a bad thing. And here's why I would say we all have biases with everybody we meet. And I'm not talking about race, creed, or color. I'm just talking about your experience with that person and how much you trust them based on their expertise. And you factor that into, if I tell you something or somebody else tells you something, you weigh that.
Yes.
And I think we need the same thing when it comes to these AI models. We need a little more transparency into how they function and what their level of accuracy is, so we can apply that bias. And so, John, do we need more transparency into these AI models? There's going to be a lot of them. We're going to mix and match them as we go along. But I think, do we trust them too much?
Yeah, no, and this is a problem, right? Because Bonnie's right, and you're both right. I mean, bias doesn't really have a negative or a positive or connotation. It's just bias. The coffee, the scenario is a bias, right? I mean, I think the biggest thing that people would say about AI, these sort of the anti-AGI people, which I've actually fell into this trap of now somebody sucked me in. I'm doing a ton of research that I didn't have a whole lot of time for, but is the models can't learn like humans. That point of the coffee, the model can't be terrible on a Monday and great on a Tuesday, because on Monday the person who sold me coffee was just miserably, and the person on Tuesday was just delightful person who brightens up the rest of your day. And that's just a small of millions and maybe trillions of transactions you even have minute by minute. And so they call it this sort of monotonic learning that a model has. So, and then the thing about the bias, I have a kind of funny story. I was giving a presentation and I wanted to make a picture of myself I just stuck with ChatGPT. I didn't even use any other. And I said, here's Botch Gloob, here's my bio, this is what I've done. Can you do it like this? Can you create a nice bookshelf? Like, I'm old. And make it older. And it made a really good looking old guy with like perfect hair. And I said, how about somebody who's more bald and a little, and the face is a little fatter. And it came back, it still made a really good looking bald. And I finally had to say to it, and there's a whole book written, Unmasking AI by Joy Balumi. So it's a brilliant book about like bias. And again, there are good forms of bias and there are bad forms of bias. The good bias is it can write novels for us. The bad time of bias is it literally could have a police force arrest somebody based on a generative AI profile, right? But like in this case, finally I had to say, okay, I want close to bald, older, fatter face, and not as good looking. And it literally it got reasonably close. But the problem was the training model for almost every image of a human. I think in Joy Baloomi's book, she talks about I'm just going to make the numbers up, but they're incredibly high. 70, 80% of the trained data is good looking white males. But so think about that across all spectrums, not just images, but text, all the text that's been written. So anyway, but the key answer to your question, Mike, is sort of the field that everybody's sort of screaming and hollering about. And it's sort of on my to-do list of a long list of things I don't have time for, but explainability. And I think that's a topic that is really worth trying to understand, trying to get and the model providers are notoriously bad. Not only, even some of the open source ones don't provide their training weights. right? So there's a whole difference between completely closed. We don't even know what they do. We don't know what they do. There's, we're open source, but we don't provide the training weights, which basically good, thanks, like, thanks, but no thanks. So.
Well, let me ask you another question about that, because I'm trying to figure out, why are these AI models so, quote unquote, overly helpful to the point where they will tell me something that they think I want to hear, or they're just trying to provide some sort of answer rather than just saying, I don't know, or probably here's my best guess. But it feels like we're waiting these things to be my best friend when I just need it to be, quote unquote, helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's part of sort of prompt engineering, right? Like almost every canonical 101 prompt says, if you don't know the answer, don't answer it, or say, I don't know, right? So that's sort of a 101 prompt. So yeah, but you have the same problem with humans, right? Let's say there's always the one in the crowd that, the Cheers, the guy in Cheers, right? Not Norm, but the other guy, right? With Cliff Clavin. He would answer every question. Mm-hmm. You always have one of those people in your work with. So the thing I always like to say is, people hallucinate as well. Computers, LLMs. People give you wrong answers. The Cliff Clavin of the company, if you ask them, hey, I got this problem, and there's this library, they're like, it's just an instinct to tell you a wrong answer. Or they'll tell you an answer they think is right, but they don't really know the answer. Based on their level of knowledge, they're giving you the right answer, but it's wrong. So I'm like, okay, Cliff, have you ever worked with this library? No, I actually haven't. Okay, now I'm going to go to somebody else, right? Like, that's the kind of dialogue you have to have with these LLMs. You have to think about it, because the key is the natural language. And the thing we have to learn is, how do we have discussions with humans to solve problems? And even though we're not dealing with human, we need to sort of apply those type of, and to your point, Mike, the fatal flaw is that people think they're magic. And like, I'm just going to ChatGPT and give me the answer. Like, but most people are intelligent enough to not go to Cliff and say, hey, Cliff, give me the answer. Give me the stock that I should buy today. Like, we don't do that with people.
All right. I guess, folks, whether you're taking advice from a machine or a person, you should consider the source, because basically, the information is only as good as what went into it. Folks, we'll be back with our third block in a minute.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Techstrong gang. Well, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, has a new version of their Llama AI model. This is open source, and it's being noted for its energy efficiency and scalability. So I decided to take a closer look at Llama 3.1.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Schneider with your Ecotech Analyst Insights. Meta's Llama 3.1 marks a notable shift on the AI landscape. This open-source large language model aims to rival its competitors while prioritizing energy efficiency. At its core, Llama 3.1 employs quantization, a technique that streamlines calculations using lower precision numbers. Early benchmarks suggest Llama 3.1 competes well with top models across various tasks. However, these results await real-world validation. The model is flexible. Available in multiple sizes, organizations can select the version best suited for their needs and resources. This scalability could drive energy savings as AI adoption expands. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg highlights Llama's open source nature. He says he wants to ensure that more people around the world have access to the benefits and opportunities of AI, so that power isn't concentrated in the hands of a small number of companies. There are headwinds to contend with. The largest version of Llama 3.1 demands significant computing power for training. This could potentially limit adoption by smaller companies. The open source model also raises valid concerns about misuse without proper safeguards. As the AI industry continues to evolve, models like Llama 3.1 could play a crucial role in driving a broader transition towards open source, energy efficient solutions.
Llama 3.1 is open source. And as you saw, Mark Zuckerberg is very optimistic about this way going forward. And we also talked about some of the processes involved with Llama 3.1, what makes it unique and energy efficient and scalable. And John, I know you have some thoughts on this process that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with who would have thunk that Zuckerberg would be playing the role of David in the David Goliath story. But yeah, no, the quantization is really interesting. I went in, I sort of watched your video. I've been trying to bring 3.1 up. I'm really, really excited on it. Like, I think you've heard in past shows we've had why, I think I really want the dark horse of open source to win because I think it's going to keep the industry honest. I think there's so many positives here. But yeah, the quantization is, again, Facebook, their technology and their innovation technology is always amazing. And this idea that they sort of reduce the processing footprint, and not to get too technical, but going from 32-bit floating points to like 8-bit over scale, that sort of changes the cost, the power, the aggregation of just changing the processing, sort of word length, as they call it in sort of us old assembler programmers. But it becomes this interesting trade-off, and like only a scale like sort of Meta could probably pull this off. Like there's a little bit of hit on performance, but the cost outweighs the aggregate cost. And then the bigger thing is it becomes much cheaper for inference, so it's a little more costly. I mean, more processing time for the training. But again, most people use these models are doing more inference than training. My surveys, informal surveys of targeting people, very few large enterprises are training models in this new Gen AI space. And so the inference savings, I think, is another great part of the trade-off. And then, it allows wider usage because you don't have to have really sort of very complex GPU rigs. At least that's in theory. I haven't prototyped or tried this. So yeah, I think that the quantization is, I think, sort of not a great way to describe it because your mind goes right to quantum computing, and it is not quantum computing. So maybe they wanted that effect, but if you sort of look at it, it's really sort of reducing the sort of instruction word length, which then has like vast implications of cost savings and utilization, all the things that add up for running large data centers.
That's true. There were different analogies to describe it. One of them was taking a picture and having one at different resolutions, but getting the same results. So I think there's different ways to kind of break it down. But one of the things that's interesting about this model, I mentioned that it's scalable. So different businesses, let's say, we're looking at smaller ones, they might be able to get the smaller version of this model or the medium-sized version of this model. So it does have that scalability.
Yeah, no, and then, again, I think what's also fascinating, they're comparing, the 405B, right, which is the, 405 billion parameter set is still well under GPTs, but they're actually saying that it really is, it took them 16 months to catch up to what is GPT-4, which again is another great sign for the dark horse of open source. And if you start looking at sort of what it claims to do or what, Jan LeCun, who works at Meta as part of this group, has published some interesting sort of comparisons on LinkedIn. they're saying that we have an open source model that in many respects competes directly with, GPT-4 and maybe GPT-4o. I'll be cautious there. GPT-4. Let's not go crazy.
No.
That's significant.
So, John, will open source ultimately carry the day here in the way it has in other categories? Is it going to play out the same way? Because right now, proprietary models seem to be have the edge in terms of performance and capabilities, but over the time, will open source kind of carry it?
Well, I mean, just to be a little contrarian, like open source still hasn't carried the day in like other fields, right? It is like enormously being successful in the aggregate of everything that's happened. You couldn't have Amazon without open source. You probably couldn't. You couldn't have Uber. You couldn't have Airbnb. Like all these sort of. But I don't like. We still struggle. Like when I do a lot of evaluations for startups, right? And like it's a coin flip, and probably even more than a coin flip. Than for in the going proprietary route than it is open source, because the business model still doesn't seem. There's only been, in my mind, one successful company that has really taken advantage of open source, and that's Red Hat, right? So, in answer to your question, I think we need it. I've said this over and over in this, in this Techstrong gang interviews that we've done, and is that we have to keep the balance, because we need the transparency, we need the explainability, we need the ability for. What we don't want is three companies owning this, right? And that's what Zuckerberg is saying. But I think how this all plays out is still, because I mean, I don't know when the GPT-5 is coming, but like the difference between GPT-4 and 4o, it was, in my experience, incredible. So like if they've got okay, we caught up. And then here's the other like little bit of scary part I have is, if Meta's the only one doing this, then what does that mean? Right? I mean, there's Mistral and they got great funding, but Meta's right now, maybe depending what NVIDIA wants to do, I don't know. Maybe I'm sort of going crazy here, but like if there's only one player that can even keep up, and if like we don't, like, do we really trust Facebook to always do the right thing here? So I don't know. It is. Again, the only thing I can do is like what I've been doing pretty much the second half of my career is rooting for open source and and believing that open source is a great vector for just many levels of success, not just monetarily.
Mm-hmm. I have another question, kind of unrelated, but you mentioned small models. So we keep using the phrase large language models, but you hear the phrase small language models now and medium-sized language models, and they seem to be coming in T-shirt sizes, small, medium, and large. So do we need to kind of change the way we think about language models, because the terminology we've moved beyond it?
I mean, I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think we talked about this in a previous, but the way the small language models are evolving is very fit for purpose, right? Like if I'm doing edge work and I have a very specific domain that I want to solve problems for, good friend of mine, Joseph Enox, he works at a company with Vision. He was at our first Gen AI hackathon, right? UVT, and he's doing work for California Edison, right? And they're building when they started, they weren't calling small language model, but he's literally creating these LLMs for people who climb up on telephone poles who need to get real accurate information for how to fix those incredibly dangerous things, right? And so that doesn't need to have a model that can tell you who Aristotle is or what abductive reasoning is, or right. It just needs to get you to the system of record answer that is legally bound, that basically doesn't kill the technician. So I think that's where these small language models come in. They're smaller, they're efficient, they can sort of be very prevalent at the edge, and they're not designed to be general purpose. I'll answer any question you need. They're designed to be, and they've been trained to be very domain specific to solve very specific problems. So whether we keep calling them small, medium, large, or
mini, that's what that chat GPT has now.
Maybe we can call them more bespoke models.
I think that's a great way.
But so bringing the two previous thoughts together, is it possible that we might see open source models that are smaller become more prevalent and the larger models become more proprietary because they just take so much more effort to build? And will there be some sort of split along size?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is, I think that we over-rotate on this discussion about training. Even some of the press releases of people who wrote about, the 3.1 and Meta, the Llama 3.1, which, it's going to be better for training. I mean, if you think about what people were doing before Gen AI, they were training a lot of models, but they were probably, in the grand scheme of things, small language models. So if you were doing Monte Carlo simulations or financial sort of models, machine learning, pre-Gen AI, right, was very specific in an organization to solve very specific problems, ad revenue or this financial modeling or those things, right? And Gen AI came along and created these insane models that can answer anything. It scraped 60% of the internet. It's got all this stuff, right? So really what the small language models are is just this sort of new generation of technology, the transformer model, to allow you to kind of go back and do more with less expertise. I mean, that's probably the biggest story. Like if you were creating these very, predictive financial models using machine learning in like a large bank, you had a small group of very, very high paid specialists. Now people who do DevOps or HR, maybe not HR, but different groups, they can actually use these, like the 3.1 has an 8 billion parameter, right? Like an 8B, and I can train it. But again, I think less training is going on in the organization because that's hard. The more likely is taking 8B and building like a retrieval augmentation generation or build your own vector databases, which is a lot easier. A lot more people can participate in that example, and you can get high efficacy answers. In some cases, maybe as good as the ones that would be done by this sort of machine learning experts.
I think it also, again, comes down to each company and their needs, and depending on their needs would depend on the model, also their resources.
Hey, you started this conversation talking about sustainability, and I think we've talked about sustainability in the past, but is anybody ranking AI models based on their sustainability factor?
I think so. I think that's a great point because it is becoming a little more competitive. If you watch all the recent releases from AI, just recently, ChatGPT has ChatGPT Mini, and one of the, selling points of it is it uses less energy. So yes, the pressure is on. We talked about a few days ago, water resources being overwhelmed by AI. So how are we going to offset the energy in various ways is absolutely coming into the conversation. And that was one of the leading factors in Llama 3.1, that this is a more energy efficient model. This is what they led with.
All right, folks, I think that's where we are for the day. We're going to come to an end on what I guess I will refer to now as AI Monday. Thanks for spending some time with us. We much appreciate it. And please stay tuned. The rest of the Techstrong TV lineup is following shortly. And it's just going to be another awesome day of outstanding programming. And we appreciate all of you who spend some time with us. And we look forward to talking to you again tomorrow.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.